The Craft of the Three Sharpers. From the Arabic. There were in time of yore 3 sharpers who were wont every day, in early morning, to prowl forth and to pray, rummaging among the mounds which outlay the city. Therein each would find a silver bit of 5 paras, or its equivalent, after which the trio would foregather and buy whatso sufficed them for supper. They would also expend 2 half-dirhams upon bast, which is bong hashish, and purchase a waxen taper with the other silver bit. They had hired a cell in the flank of a wakala, a caravanserai without the walls, where they could sit at ease to solace themselves and eat their hashish after lighting the candle, and enjoy their intoxication and consequent merriment till the noon o' night. Then they would sleep, again awaking at day-dawn, when they would arise and seek for spoil, according to their custom, and ransack the heaps, where at times they would hit upon a silvering of 5 dirhams, and at other times a piece of 4, and at eventide they would meet to spend together the dark hours, and they would expend everything they came by every day. For a length of time they pursued this path, until, one day of the days, they made for the mounds as was their wont, and went round searching the heaps from morning to evening, without finding even a half-para. Wherefore they were troubled, and they went away and nighted in their cell without meat or drink. When the next day broke they arose and repaired for booty, changing the places wherein they were wont to forage. But none of them found aught, and their breasts were straitened for a lack of a find of dirhams wherewith to buy their supper. This lasted for 3 full told and following days, until hunger waxed hard upon them and vexation, so they said one to other, Go we to the Sultan, and let us serve him with a sleight, and each of us 3 shall claim to be a past master of some craft. Haply Allah Almighty may incline his heart usward, and he may largesse us with something to expend upon our necessities. Accordingly all 3 agreed to do on this wise, and they sought the Sultan, whom they found in the palace garden. They asked leave to go in to him, but the chamberlains refused admission. So they stood afar off, unable to approach the presence. Then quoth they one to other, "'Twere better we fall to, and each smite his comrade, and cry aloud, and make a clamor, and as soon as he shall hear us, he will send to summon us." Accordingly they jostled one another, and each took to frapping his fellow, making the while loud cries. The Sultan, hearing this turmoil, said, "Bring me yonder wights." And the chamberlains and eunuchs ran out to them and seized them and set them between the hands of the sovereign. As soon as they stood in the presence, he asked them, "What be the cause of your wrath, one against other?" They answered, "O King of the age, we are past masters of crafts, each of us weeting an especial art." Quoth the Sultan, "What be your crafts?" And quoth one of the trio, "O our lord, as for my part, I am a jeweler by trade." The king exclaimed, "Passing strange! A sharper and a jeweler! This is a wondrous matter." And he questioned the second sharper, saying, "And thou, the other, what may be thy craft?" He answered, "I am a genealogist of the horse kind." So the king glanced at him in surprise, and said to himself, "A sharper, yet he claimeth an astounding knowledge." Then he left them and put the same question to the third, who said to him, "O King of the age, verily my art is more wondrous and marvelous than aught thou hast heard from these twain. Their craft is easy, but mine is such that none save I can discover the right direction thereto, or know the first of it from the last of it." The Sultan inquired of him, "And what be thy craft?" Whereunto he replied, "My craft is the genealogy of the sons of Adam." Hearing these words, the sovereign wondered with extreme wonderment, and said in himself, "Verily he informeth with his secrets the humblest of his creatures. Assuredly these men, an they speak truth in all they say, and it prove soothfast, are fit for naught except kingship. But I will keep them by me, until the occurrence of some nice contingency wherein I may test them. Then, if they approve themselves good men and trustworthy of word, I will leave them on life. But if their speech be lying, I will do them die. Upon this he set apart for them apartments, and rationed them with 3 cakes of bread and a dish of roast meat, and set over them his sentinels dreading lest they fly. This case continued for a while, till behold, there came to the Sultan from the land of Ajam a present of rarities, among which were 2 gems, whereof one was clear of water, and the other was clouded of colour. The Sultan hent them in hand for a time, and fell to considering them straitly for the space of an hour. After which he called to mind the first of the 3 sharpers, the self-styled jeweller, and cried, Bring me the jeweller man. Accordingly they went and brought him and set him before the sovereign, who asked him, O man, art thou a lapidary? And when the sharper answered, Yes, he gave him the clear-watered stone, saying, What may be the price of this gem? Then the sharper took the jewel in hand, and turned it rightward and leftward, and considered the outside, and pried into the inside. After which he said to the Sultan, O my lord, verily this gem containeth a worm bred within the heart thereof. Now when the king heard these words, he waxed wroth with exceeding wrath, and commanded the man's head to be stricken off, saying, This jewel is clear of colour and free of flaw or other default, yet thou chargest it falsely with containing a worm. Then he summoned the linkman, who laid hands on the sharper, and pinioned his elbows, and trussed up his legs like a camel's, and was about to smite his neck when, behold, the Wazir entered the presence, and seeing the sovereign in high dudgeon, and the sharper under his scimitar, asked what was to do. The Sultan related to him what had happened, when he drew near to him and said, O my lord, act not after this fashion. An thou determine upon the killing of yonder man, first break the gem, and if thou find therein a worm, thou wilt know the wight's word to have been veridical. But an thou find it sound, then strike off his head. Right is thy rede, quoth the king. Then he took in hand the gem, and smote it with his mace, and when it brake, behold, he found therein the worm a middlemost thereof. So he marvelled at the sight, and asked the man, What proved to thee that it harboured a worm? The sharpness of my sight, answered the sharper. Then the Sultan pardoned him, and, admiring his power of vision, addressed his attendants, saying, Bear him back to his comrades, and ration him with a dish of roast meat and 2 cakes of bread. And they did as he bade them. After some time, on a day of the days, there came to the king the tribute of Ajam land, accompanied with presents, among which was a colt, whose robe black as night showed one shade in the sun and another in the shadow. When the animal was displayed to the Sultan, he fell in love with it, and set apart for it a stall, and solaced himself at all times by gazing at it, and was wholly occupied with it, and sang its praises till they filled the whole countryside. Presently he remembered the sharper who claimed to be a genealogist of the horse kind, and bade him to be summoned. So they fared forth and brought him and set him between the hands of the sovereign, who said to him, Art thou he who knoweth the breed and descent of horses? Yea, verily, said the man. Then cried the king, By the truth of him who set me upon the necks of his servants, and who saith to a thing, Be, and it becometh, and I find aught of error or confusion in thy words, I will strike off thy head. Hearkening and obedience, quoth the sharper. Then they led him to the colt, that he might consider its genealogy. He called aloud to the groom, and when they brought him, he bade the man back the colt for his inspection. So he mounted the animal, and made it pace to the right and to the left, causing it now to prance and curvet, and then to step leisurely, while the connoisseur looked on, and after a time, quoth he to the groom, "'Tis enough." Then he went in to the presence, and stood between the hands of the king, who inquired, "What hast thou seen in the colt, O Kashmar?" Replied the sharper, "By Allah, O King of the Age, this colt is of pure and noble blood on the side of the sire. Its action is excellent, and all its qualities are praiseworthy, save one. And but for this one, it had been perfect in blood and breed, nor had there been on earth's face its fellow in horseflesh." but its blemish remaineth a secret. The Sultan asked, And what is the quality which thou blamest? And the sharper answered, Its sire was noble, but its dam was of other strain. She it was that brought the blemish, and if thou, O my lord, allow me, I will notify it to thee. 'Tis well, and needs must thou declare it, quoth the Sultan. Then said the sharper, Its dam is a buffalo cow. When the king heard these words, he was wroth with wrath exceeding, and he bade the linkman take the sharper and behead him, crying, O dog! O accursed! How can a buffalo cow bear a horse? The sharper replied, O my lord, the linkman is in the presence, but send and fetch him who brought thee the colt, and of him make inquiry. If my words prove true and rightly placed, my skill shall be stablished. But an they be lies, let my head pay forfeit for my tongue. Here standeth the linkman, and I am between thy hands. Thou hast but to bid him strike off my head. Thereupon the king sent for the owner and breeder of the colt, and they brought him to the presence. And the Sultan asked him, saying, Tell me of the truth, anent the blood of this colt. Didst thou buy it or breed it, so that it was a rearling of thy homestead? Said he, By Allah, O King of the age, I speak not which is not sooth, for indeed there hangeth by this colt the strangest story. Were it graven with graver needles upon the eye corners, it had been a warning to whoso would be warned. And this it is. I had a stallion of purest strain, whose sire was of the steeds of the sea, and he was stabled in a stall apart for fear of the evil eye, his service being entrusted to trusty servants. But one day in springtide, the Sais took the horse into the open, and allowed him to mate with the buffalo cow. She conceived by him, and when her days were completed, and her throwing time came, she suffered sore pains, and bare yonder colt. And all who have seen it, or have heard of it, were astounded. Said he, presently adding, By Allah, O King of the age, had its dam been of the mare kind, the colt would have had no equal on earth's surface, or aught approaching it. Hereat the Sultan took thought, and marvelled. Then, summoning the sharper, he said to him when present, O man, thy speech is true, and thou art indeed a genealogist in horseflesh, and thou wottest it well. But I would know what proved to thee that the dam of this colt was a buffalo cow. Said he, O king, my proof thereof was palpable, nor can it be concealed from any wight of right wits and intelligence, and special knowledge. For the horse's hoof is round, while the hoofs of buffaloes are elongated and duck-shaped, and hereby I kenned that this colt was a Jumart, the issue of a buffalo cow. The Sultan was pleased with his words, and said, Ration him with a plate of roast meat and 2 cakes of bread. And they did as they were bidden. Now for a length of time the third sharper was forgotten, till one day the Sultan bethought him of the man who could explain the genealogy of Adam's sons. So he bade fetch him, and when they brought him into the presence, he said, Thou art he that knowest the caste and descent of men and women. And the other said, Yes. Then he commanded the eunuchs take him to his wife, and place him before her, and cause him declare her genealogy. So they led him in, and set him standing in her presence. And the sharper considered her for a while, looking from right to left. Then he fared forth to the Sultan, who asked him, What hast thou seen in the queen? Answered he, O my lord, I saw a somewhat adorned with loveliness and beauty and perfect grace, with fair stature of symmetrical trace, and with modesty and fine manners and skillful case. And she is one in whom all good qualities appear on every side, nor is aught of accomplishments or knowledge concealed from her, and happily in her centre all desirable attributes. Natheless, O King of the age, there is a curious point that dishonoureth her, from the which, were she free, none would outshine her of all the women of her generation. Now when the Sultan heard the words of the sharper, he sprang hastily to his feet, and clapping hand upon hilt, bared his brand, and fell upon the man, purposing to slay him. But the chamberlains and the eunuchs prevented him, saying, O our lord, kill him not until his falsehood or his fact shall have been made manifest to thee. The Sultan said to him, What then appeared to thee in my queen? She is fairly fair, said the man, but her mother is a dancing girl, a gypsy. The fury of the king increased hereat, and he sent to summon the inmates of his harem, and cried to his father-in-law, Unless thou speak me sooth concerning thy daughter, and her descent, and her mother, He replied, By Allah, O King of the Age, naught saveth a man save soothfastness. Her mother was indeed a Ghaziyah. In past time a party of the tribe was passing by my abode, when a young maid strayed from her fellows and was lost. They asked no questions concerning her, so I lodged her and bred her in my homestead, till she grew up to be a great girl and the fairest of her time. My heart would not brook her wiving with any other, so I wedded her, and she bare me this daughter whom thou, O King, hast espoused. When the Sultan heard these words, the flame in his heart was quenched, and he wondered at the subtlety of the sharper man. So he summoned him and asked him, saying, O wily one, tell me what certified to thee that my queen had a dancing girl, a gypsy, to mother. He answered, O King of the Age, verily the Ghaziyah race hath eyeballs intensely black and bushy brows, whereas other women than the Ghaziyah have the reverse of this. On such wise the king was convinced of the man's skill, and he cried, Ration him with a dish of roast meat and 2 scones. They did as he bade, and the 3 sharpers tarried with the Sultan a long time, till one day when the king said to himself, Verily these 3 men have by their skill solved every question of genealogy which I proposed to them. First the jeweler proved his perfect knowledge of gems. Secondly, the genealogist of the horse kind showed himself as skillful. And the same was the case with the genealogist of mankind, for he discovered the origin of my queen, and the truth of his words appeared from all quarters. Now 'tis my desire that he do the same with me, that I also may know my provenance. Accordingly they set the man between his hands, and he said to him, O fellow, hast thou the power to tell me mine origin? Said the sharper, Yes, O my lord, I can trace thy descent, but I will do so only on a condition, to wit, that thou promise me safety after what I shall have told thee. For the Saul saith, Whilst Sultan sitteth on throne, wear his despite, inasmuch as none may be contumacious when he saith smite. Thereupon the Sultan told him, Thou hast a promise of immunity, a promise which shall never be falsed. And the man said, O King of the Age, when as I acquaint thee with thy root and branch, let it be between us twain, lest these present hear us. Wherefore, O man? Asked the Sultan, and the sharper answered, O my lord, Allah the All-Might hath among his names the Veiler. Wherefore the king bade his chamberlains and eunuchs retire so that none remained in the place save those 2. Then the sharper came forward and said, O my lord, thou art not the son of a king. As soon as the king heard these words, his case changed, and his color waxed wan, and his limbs fell loose. He foamed at the mouth. He lost hearing and sight. He became as one drunken without wine, and he fell fainting to the ground. After a while he recovered and said to the sharper, Now by the truth of him who hath set me upon the necks of his servants, and thy words be veridical, and I ascertain their sooth by proof positive, I will assuredly abdicate my kingdom, and resign my realm to thee, because none deserveth it, save thou, and it becometh us least of all and every. But an I find thy speech lying, I will slay thee. He replied, hearing and obeying, and the sovereign, rising up without stay or delay, went inside to his mother, with grip on glaive, and said to her, By the truth of him who uplifted the sky above the earth, and thou answer me not with the whole truth in whatso I ask thee, I will cut thee to little bits with this blade. She inquired, What dost thou want with me? And he replied, Whose son am I? and what may be my descent?" She rejoined, "Although falsehood be an excuse, fact and truth are superior and more saving. Thou art indeed the very son of a cook. The Sultan that was before thee took me to wife, but we had no issue, and he would mourn and groan from the core of his heart, for that he had no seed, nor girl nor boy, neither could he enjoy aught of sweet food or sleep. Now it chanced that the wife of the Kitchener bare him a boy, and I prevailed upon her to keep the birth secret, and my woman brought the child to me, and spread abroad that at last an heir was come. Now at that time the Sultan was hunting and birding and enjoying himself about the gardens, and when the bearer of good news went to him and announced the birth of a man-child, he hurried back to me and forthright bade them decorate the capital, and he found the report true. So the city adorned itself for 40 days in honor of its king. Such is my case and my tale." Thereupon the king went forth from her to the sharper and bade him doff his dress, and when this had been done, he doffed his own raiment and habited the man in royal gear, and hooded him with a talison, and asked him, saying, "What proof hast thou of my being base born?" The sharper answered, "O my lord, my proof was thy bidding our being rationed, after showing the perfection of our skill, with a dish of roast meat and 2 scones of bread, whereby I knew thee to be of cook's breed. For the kings be wont in such case to make presents of money and valuables, not of meat and bread, as thou didst. And this evidenced thee to be no king's son, but a cook's son." He replied, "Sooth thou sayest," and then robed him with the rest of his robes, including the kalansuwa, or royal headdress, under the hood, and seating him upon the throne of his estate, went forth from him, after abandoning all his women to him, and assumed the garb of a darwash, who wandered about the world, and formally abdicated his dominion to his successor. But when the sharper king saw himself in this condition, he reflected, and said to himself, "Summon thy whilom comrades, and see whether they recognize thee or not." So he caused them be set before him, and conversed with them. Then, perceiving that none knew him, he gifted them and sent them to gang their gate. And he ruled his realm, and bade and forbade, and gave and took away, and was gracious and generous to each and every of his lieges, so that the people of that region, who were his subjects, blessed him and prayed for him. The Cheerful Workman, from the Arabic. It is mentioned in the celebrated Arabic work entitled The Mirror of the Age, that one of the caliphs of the house of Abbas, Mutasid Billah, besides being a very brave and courageous person, was also possessed of keen observation and the faculty of knowing men by their physiognomy. One day, as he was inspecting the erection of a palace on the banks of the Tigris, which he was wont to do once a week and encourage the builders with presents and other acts of favor, he observed that each of the men employed carrying stones to the edifice bore but one at a time, and that with great gravity and slowness. Among them, however, he perceived one, with black hands and dark complexion, who invariably lifted 2 at a time, put them on his back, and with evident joy and elasticity carried them from the wharf to the masons. On seeing this, the caliph pointed him out to Hussein, one of his attendants, and asked the cause of this man's unnatural gaiety. The attendant answered that the caliph was more competent to form an opinion of the case than himself. The caliph then added that the man was probably possessed of a large sum of money, and was therefore happy from the consciousness of his wealth, or that he was a thief, who had only sought employment among the workmen for the purpose of concealment. "I do not like his appearance," continued the Prince of the Faithful. "Have him brought into my presence." So, when the man was come, the caliph asked him what his occupation was, and he answered that he was a common laborer. "Have you any money laid by?" demanded the caliph. "None," replied the man. "Tell me the truth," again asked the caliph, repeating the question, and again the man answered in the negative. Then the Caliph ordered an officer to strike the man, which being done, he immediately cried out for pity and pardon. "Speak the truth," said the officer, "or the Caliph will punish you as long as you live." So the man avowed that his trade was that of a tile maker, and one day he added, "When I had prepared my kiln and lit the fire, a man approached me, mounted on an ass, who, dismounting before my kiln, let the ass go, and beginning to undress himself, took from around his waist a girdle, which he placed by his side, and began fleeing himself. I, seeing that the man was quite alone, caught him, and throwing him into the furnace of my kiln, closed it down. I then took his girdle, and after killing the ass, threw it also into the fire. See, here is the girdle." The Caliph took it, and on examining it, found it contained some thousands of gold pieces, and moreover had its owner's name written upon it. On this discovery the Caliph sent criers out, to ask in the streets whether any family had lost a member, or a friend, and if so, to come before him. Soon an aged woman approached and exclaimed, "My son left me with some thousands of gold pieces, with which to buy merchandise, and is lost." They showed her the girdle, which she immediately recognized as her son's, and said that it had his name upon it. The Caliph now gave the girdle into the old woman's hands, saying, "See before you the murderer of your son." She demanded the right of retaliation, and the man was forthwith hung upon the door of him whom he had murdered. All the world admired the Caliph's sagacity and commended his justice. The Robber and the Woman. From the Arabic. A certain robber was a cunning workman, and used not to steal aught till he had wasted all that was with him. Moreover, he stole not from his neighbors, neither companied with any of the thieves, for fear lest some one should betray him, and his case become public. After this fashion he abode a great while, in flourishing condition, and his secret was concealed, till Almighty Allah decreed that he broke in upon a beggar, a poor man whom he deemed rich. When he gained access to the house, he found naught, whereat he was wroth, and necessity prompted him to wake that man, who lay asleep alongside of his wife. So he aroused him and said to him, "Show me thy treasure." Now he had no treasure to show, but the robber believed him not, and was instant upon him with threats and blows. When he saw that he got no profit of him, he said to him, "Swear by the oath of divorce from thy wife that thou hast nothing." So he swore, and his wife said to him, "Fie on thee! Wilt thou divorce me? Is not the hoard buried in yonder chamber?" Then she turned to the robber and conjured him to be weightier of blows upon her husband, till he should deliver to him the treasure, anent which he had forsworn himself. So he drubbed him with a grievous drubbing, till he carried him to a certain chamber, wherein she signed to him where the hoard was, and that he should take it up. So the robber entered, he and the husband, and when they were both in the chamber, she locked on them the door, which was a stout and strong, and said to the robber, "Woe to thee, O fool! Thou hast fallen into the trap, and now I have but to cry out, and the officers of police will come and take thee, and thou wilt lose thy life, O Satan." Quoth he, "Let me go forth." And quoth she, "Thou art a man and I am a woman, and in thy hand is a knife, and I am afraid of thee." He cried, "Take the knife from me." So she took it, and said to her husband, "Art thou a woman and he a man? Pain his neck-nape with flogging, even as he flogged thee, and if he put out his hand to thee, I will cry out a single cry, and the policemen will come and take him and hew him in two." So the husband said to him, "O thousand-horned, O dog, O dodger, I owe thee a deposit wherefore thou hast done me." And he fell to bashing him grievously with a stick of holm oak, while he called out to the woman for help and prayed her to deliver him. But she said, "Keep thy place till the morning, and thou shalt see queer things." And her husband beat him within the chamber, till he overcame him, and he swooned away. Then he left beating him, and when the robber came to himself, the woman said to her husband, "O man, this house is on hire, and we owe its owners much money, and we have naught. So how wilt thou do?" And she went on to bespeak him thus. The robber asked, "And what is the amount of the rent?" The husband answered, "'Twill be 80 dirhams." And the thief said, "I will pay this for thee, and do thou let me go my way." Then the wife inquired, "O man, how much do we owe the baker and the greengrocer?" Quoth the robber, "What is the sum of this?" And the husband said, 60 dirhams. Rejoined the other, "That makes 200 dirhams. Let me go my way, and I will pay them." But the wife said, "O my dear, and the girl groweth up, and needs must we marry her, and equip her, and do what else is needful." So the robber said to the husband, "How much dost thou want?" And he rejoined, 100 dirhams in a modest way. Quoth the robber, "That maketh 300 dirhams." Then the woman said, "O dear, when the girl is married, thou wilt need money for winter expenses, charcoal and firewood, and other necessaries." The robber asked, "What wouldst thou have?" And she answered, 100 dirhams. He rejoined, "Be it 400 dirhams." And she continued, "O my dear, and coolth of my eyes, needs must my husband have capital in hand, wherewith he may buy goods and open him a shop." Said he, "How much will that be?" And she said, 100 dirhams. Quoth the robber, "That maketh 500 dirhams. I will pay it. But may I be triply divorced from my wife, if all my possessions amount to more than this, and they be the savings of 20 years. Let me go my way, so I may deliver them to thee." Cried she, "O fool! How shall I let thee go thy way? Utterly impossible. Be pleased to give me a right token." So he gave her a token for his wife, and she cried out to her young daughter and said to her, "Keep this door." Then she charged her husband to watch over the robber till she should return, and, repairing to his wife, acquainted her with his case, and told her that her husband the thief had been taken and had compounded for his release at the price of 700 dirhams, and named to her the token. Accordingly she gave her the money, and she took it and returned to her house. By this time the dawn had dawned, so she let the thief go his way. And when he went out, she said to him, "O my dear, when shall I see thee come and take the treasure?" And he, "O indebted one, when thou needst other 700 dirhams, wherewith to amend thy case and that of thy children, and to pay thy debts." And he went out, hardly believing in his deliverance from her.
The Weaver Who Became a Leech. From the Arabic. There was once, in the land of Fars, Persia, a man who wedded a woman higher than himself in rank, and nobler of lineage, but she had no guardian to preserve her from want. She loathed to marry one who was beneath her, yet she wived with him because of need, and took of him a bond in writing, to the effect that he would ever be under her order, to bid and forbid, and would never thwart her in word or in deed. Now the man was a weaver, and he bound himself in writing to pay his wife 10,000 dirhams in case of default. After such fashion they abode a long while, till one day the wife went out to fetch water, of which she had need, and saw a leech who had spread a carpet hard by the road, whereon he had set out great store of simples and implements of medicine, and he was speaking and muttering charms, whilst the folk flocked to him from all quarters and girt him about on every side. The weaver's wife marvelled at the largeness of the physician's fortune, and said in herself, "Were my husband thus, he would lead an easy life, and that wherein we are of straitness and poverty would be widened to him." Then she returned home, carkful and careful, and when her husband saw her in this condition, he questioned her of her case, and she said to him, Verily my breast is narrowed by reason of thee, and of the very goodness of thine intent. Presently adding, Narrow means suit me not, and thou, in thy present craft, gainst naught. So either do thou seek out a business other than this, or pay me my rightful due, and let me wend my ways. Her husband chid her for this, and advised her to take patience, but she would not be turned from her design, and said to him, Go forth, and watch yonder physician how he doeth, and learn from him what he saith. Said he, Let not thy heart be troubled, and added, I will go every day to the session of the leech. So he began resorting daily to the physician, and committing to memory his answers, and that which he spoke of jargon, till he had gotten a great matter by rote, and all this he learned and thoroughly digested it. Then he returned to his wife, and said to her, I have stored up the physician's sayings in memory, and have mastered his manner of muttering and diagnoses, and prescribing remedies. And I wot by heart the names of the medicines, and of all the diseases, and there abideth of thy bidding naught undone. So what dost thou command me now to do? Quoth she, Leave the loom, and open thyself a leech's shop. But quoth he, My fellow townsmen know me, and this affair will not profit me, save in a land of strangerhood. So come, let us go out from this city, and get us to a foreign land, and there live. And she said, Do whatso thou willest. Accordingly he arose, and taking his weaving gear, sold it, and bought with the price drugs and simples, and wrought himself a carpet, with which they set out and journeyed to a certain village, where they took up their abode. Then the man fell to going round about the hamlets and villages and outskirts of towns, after donning leech's dress, and he began to earn his livelihood, and make much gain. Their affairs prospered, and their circumstances were bettered, wherefore they praised Allah for their present ease, and the village became to them a home. In this way he lived for a long time, but at length he wandered anew, and the days and the nights ceased not to transport him from country to country, till he came to the land of the Ruum, Greeks, and lighted down in a city thereof, wherein was Jalanus, Galen, the sage, but the weaver knew him not, nor was aware who he was. So he fared forth, as was his wont, in quest of a place where the folk might be gathered together, and hired the courtyard of Jalanus. There he spread his carpet, and setting out on it his simples and instruments of medicine, praised himself and his skill, and claimed a cleverness such as none but he might claim. Jalanus heard that which he affirmed of his understanding, and it was certified unto him and established in his mind that the man was a skilled leech of the leeches of the Persians. And he said in himself, Unless he had confidence in his knowledge, and were minded to confront me and contend with me, he had not sought the door of my house, neither had he spoken that which he hath spoken. And care and doubt got hold upon Jalanus, so he drew near the weaver, and addressed himself to see how his doings should end, whilst the folk began to flock to him and describe to him their ailments, and he would answer them thereof, hitting the mark one while, and missing it another while, so that naught appeared to Jalanus of his fashion, whereby his mind might be assured that he had justly estimated his skill. Presently up came a woman, and when the weaver saw her afar off, he said to her, Is not your husband a Jew, and is not his ailment flatulence? Yes, replied the woman, and the folk marvelled at this, wherefore the man was magnified in the eyes of Jalanus, for that he heard speech such as was not of the usage of doctors. Then the woman asked, What is the remedy? And the weaver answered, Bring the honorarium. So she paid him a dirham, and he gave her medicines contrary to that ailment, and such as would only aggravate the complaint. When Jalanus saw what appeared to him of the man's incapacity, he turned to his disciples and pupils, and bade them fetch the mock doctor with all his gear and drugs. Accordingly they brought him into his presence without stay or delay, and when Jalinus saw him before him, he asked him, "Knowest thou me?" And the other answered, "No, nor did I ever set eyes on thee before this day." Quoth the sage, "Dost thou know Jalinus?" And quoth the weaver, "No." Then said Jalinus, "What drove thee to do that which thou doest?" So he acquainted him with his adventure, especially with the dowry and the obligation by which he was bound with regard to his wife, whereat the sage marvelled, and certified himself anent the matter of the marriage settlement. Then he bade lodge him near himself, and entreated him with kindness, and took him apart, and said to him, "Expound to me whence thou knewest that the woman was from a man, and he a stranger and a Jew, and that his ailment was flatulence." The weaver replied, "'Tis well. Thou must know that we people of Persia are skilled in physiognomy, and I saw the woman to be rosy-cheeked, blue-eyed, and tall-statured. These qualities belong not to the women of Roum. Moreover, I saw her burning with anxiety, so I knew that the patient was her husband. As for his strangerhood, I noted that the dress of the woman differed from that of the townsfolk, wherefore I knew that she was a foreigner, and in her hand I saw a yellow rag, which garred me wot that the sick man was a Jew, and she a Jewess. Moreover, she came to me on first day, and 'tis the Jew's custom to take meat puddings and food that hath passed the night, and eat them on the Saturday, their Sabbath, hot and cold, and they exceed in eating, wherefore flatulence and indigestion betide them. Thus I was directed, and guessed that which thou hast heard." Now when Jalinus heard this, he ordered the weaver the amount of his wife's dowry, and bade him pay it to her, and said to him, "Divorce her." Furthermore, he forbade him from returning to the practice of physic, and warned him never again to take to wife a woman of rank higher than his own. And he gave him his spending money, and charged him to return to his proper craft.
Told by the Constable, from the 1001 Nights. Know ye that when I entered the service of this Emir, I had a great repute, and every low fellow and lewd feared me most of all mankind. And when I rode through the city, each and every of the folk would point at me with their fingers and sign at me with their eyes. It happened one day, as I sat in the palace of the prefecture, back propped against a wall, considering in myself, suddenly there fell somewhat in my lap, and behold, it was a purse sealed and tied. So I hinted in hand, and lo, it had in it 100 dirhams. But I found not who threw it, and I said, Lauded be the Lord, the King of the kingdoms. Another day, as I sat in the same way, somewhat fell on me and startled me, and look I, 'twas a purse like the first. I took it, and hiding the matter, made as though I slept, albeit sleep was not with me. One day, as I thus shammed sleep, I suddenly sensed in my lap a hand, and in it a purse of the finest. So I seized the hand, and behold, 'twas that of a fair woman. Quoth I to her, O my lady, who art thou? And quoth she, Rise and come away from here, that I may make myself known to thee. Presently I rose up, and following her, walked on without tarrying, till we stopped at the door of a high-builded house, whereupon I asked her, O my lady, who art thou? Indeed thou hast done me kindness. And what is the reason of this? She answered, By Allah, O Captain Mu'in, I am a woman on whom love and longing are sore for desire of the daughter of the Kasi Amin al-Hakum. Now there was between me and her what was, and fondness for her fell upon my heart. And I agreed upon an assignation with her, according to possibility and convenience. But her father Amin al-Hakum took her and went away. And my heart cleaveth to her, and yearning and distraction waxed sore upon me for her sake. I said to her, marveling the while at her words, What wouldst thou have me do? And said she, O Captain Mu'in, I would have thee lend me helping hand. Quoth I, Where am I? And where is the daughter of the Kasi Amin al-Hakum? And quoth she, Be assured that I would not have thee intrude upon the Kasi's daughter, but I would fain work for the winning of my wishes. This is my will and my want, which may not be wroughten save by thine aid. Then she added, I mean this night to go with heart enheartened, and hire me bracelets and armlets and anklets of price. Then will I hie me and sit in the street wherein is the house of Amin al-Hakum. And when 'tis the season of the round and folk are asleep, do thou pass, thou and those who are with thee of the men, and thou wilt see me sitting, and on me find raiment and ornaments, and wilt smell on me the odor of otars. Whereupon do thou question me of my case, and I will say, I hail from the citadel, and am of the daughters of the deputies, and I came down into the town for a purpose. But night overtook me all unawares, and the Zawalia gate was shut against me, and all the other portals, and I knew not whither I shall wend this night. Presently I saw this street, and noting the goodly fashion of its ordinance and its cleanliness, I sheltered me therein against break of day. When I speak these words to thee, with complete self-possession, the chief of the watch will have no ill suspicion of me, but will say, There is no help, but that we leave her with one who will take care of her till morning. There too do thou rejoin. 'Twere best that she night with Amin al-Hakum, and lie with his wives and his children until dawn of day. Then straightway knock at the Qazi's door, and thus shall I have secured admission into his house, without inconvenience, and won my wish and the peace. I said to her, By Allah, this is an easy matter. So when the night was blackest, we rose to make our round, followed by men with girded swords, and went about the ways encompassing the city, till we came to the street where was the woman. And it was the middle of the night, where we smelled rich scents, and heard the clanking of rings. So I said to my comrades, Methinks I espy a spectre, and the captain of the watch cried, See what it is. Accordingly I undertook the work, and entering the thoroughfare presently came out again and said, I found a fair woman, and she telleth me that she is from the citadel, and that dark night surprised her. And she saw this street, and noting its cleanliness and goodly fashion of ordinance, knew that it belonged to a great man, and that needs must there be in it a guardian to keep watch over it. So she sheltered her therein. Quoth the captain of the watch to me, Take her and carry her to thy house. But quoth I seek refuge with Allah. My house is no strong box, and on this woman are trinkets and fine clothing. By Allah, we will not deposit the lady save with Amin al-Hakum, in whose street she hath been since the first darkening of the darkness. Therefore do thou leave her with him till break of day. He rejoined, Do whatso thou willest. So I rapped at the Qazi's gate, and out came a black slave of his slaves, to whom said I, O my lord, take this woman, and let her be with you till day shall dawn. For that the lieutenant of the Emir, Alam ad-Din, hath found her with trinkets and fine apparel on her, sitting at the door of your house, and we feared lest her responsibility be upon you. Wherefore I suggested 'twere meetest she night with you. So the chattel opened and took her in with him. Now when the morning morrowed, the first who presented himself before the Emir was the Kasi Amin al-Hakum, leaning on two of his negro slaves, and he was crying out and calling for aid and saying, O Emir, crafty and perfidious, yesternight thou depositedst with me a woman, and broughtest her into my house and home. And she arose in the dark, and took from me the monies of the little orphans my wards, 6 great bags, each containing 1,000 dinars, and made off. But as for me, I will say no syllable to thee except in the Sultan's presence. When the Wali heard these words, He was troubled, and rose, and sat down in his agitation. Then he took the judge, and placing him by his side, soothed him, and exhorted him to patience, till he had made an end of talk. When he turned to the officers, and questioned them of that, they fixed the affair on me, and said, We know nothing of this matter but from Captain Mu'in al-Din. So the Kasi turned to me, and said, Thou wast of accord to practice upon me with this woman? For she said she came from the citadel. As for me, I stood with my head bowed groundwards, forgetting both Sunnah and Fars, and remained sunk in my thought, saying, How came I to be duped by that wily wench? Then cried the Emir to me, What aileth thee that thou answerest not? Thereupon I replied, O my lord, 'tis a custom among the folk, that he who hath a payment to make at a certain date is allowed 3 days' grace. Do thou have patience with me so long, and if at the end of that time the culprit be not found, I will be responsible for that which is lost. When the folk heard my speech, they all approved it as reasonable. And the Wali turned to the Kasi and sware to him that he would do his utmost to recover the stolen monies, adding, And they shall be restored to thee. Then he went away, whilst I mounted without stay or delay, and began toing and froing about the world, without purpose, and indeed I was become the underling of a woman without honesty or honor. And I went my rounds in this way all that my day and all that my night, but happened not upon tidings of her. And thus I did on the morrow. On the 3rd day I said to myself, Thou art mad or silly, for I was wandering in quest of a woman, who knew me and I knew her not, she being veiled when I met her. Then I went round about the 3rd day, till the hour of mid-afternoon prayer, and sore waxed my cark in my care, for I kenned that there remained to me of my life but the morrow, when the chief of police would send for me. However, as sundown time came, I passed through one of the main streets, and saw a woman at a window. Her door was ajar, and she was clapping her hands and casting sidelong glances at me, as who should say, Come up by the door. So I went up, without fear or suspicion, and when I entered, she rose and clasped me to her breast. I marveled at the matter, and quoth she to me, I am she whom thou depositedst with Amin al-Hakum. Quoth I to her, O my sister, I have been going round and round in request of thee. For indeed thou hast done a deed which will be chronicled, and hast cast me into red death on thine account. She asked me, Dost thou speak thus to me, and thou a captain of men? And I answered, How should I not be troubled, seeing that I be in concern for an affair that I turn over and over in mind, more by token that I continue my day long going about searching for thee. And in the night I watch its stars and the planets. Cried she, Naught shall betide save weal, and thou shalt get the better of him. So saying, she rose, and going to a chest, drew out therefrom 6 bags full of gold, and said to me, This is what I took from Amin al-Hakum's house. So an thou wilt restore it, else the whole is lawfully thine. And if thou desire other than this, thou shalt obtain it, for I have monies in plenty, and I had no design herein, save to marry thee. Then she arose, and opening other chest, brought out therefrom wealth galore. And I said to her, O my sister, I have no wish for all this, nor do I want aught, except to be quit of that wherein I am. Quoth she, I came not forth from the Kazi's house without preparing for thine acquittance. Then said she to me, When the morrow shall morn, and Amin al-Hakum shall come to thee, bear with him, till he have made an end of his speech. And when he is silent, return him no reply. And if the Wali asks, What aileth thee that thou answerest me not? Do thou rejoin, O Lord and Master, know that the 2 words are not alike, but there is no helper for the conquered one, save Allah Almighty. The Kasi will cry, What is the meaning of thy saying? The 2 words are not alike. And do thou retort, I deposited with thee a damsel from the palace of the Sultan, and most likely some enemy of hers in thy household hath transgressed against her, or she hath been secretly murdered. Verily, there were on her raiment and ornaments worth 1,000 ducats. And hast thou put to the question those who are with thee of slaves and slave girls? Needs must thou have litten on some traces of the crime. When he heareth this from thee, his trouble will redouble, and he will be angered, and will make oath that thou hast no help for it but to go with him to his house. However, do thou say, That will I not do, for I am the party aggrieved, more especially because I am under suspicion with thee. If he redouble in calling on Aladdin, and conjure thee by the oath of divorce, saying, Thou must assuredly come, do thou reply, By Allah, I will not go, unless the chief also go with me. Then, as soon as thou comest to the house, begin by searching the terrace roofs, then rummage the closets and cabinets, and if thou find naught, humble thyself before the Kasi, and be abject, and feign thyself subjected, and after examine well the door, because there is a dark corner there. Then come forward, with heart harder than cyanite stone, and lay hold upon a jar of the jars, and raise it from its place. Thou wilt find there under it a mantilla skirt. Bring it out publicly, and call the wali in a loud voice, before those who are present. Then open it, and thou wilt find it full of blood, and therein a woman's walking boots, and somewhat of linen. When I heard from her these words, I rose to go out, and she said to me, Take these 100 sequins, so they may succor thee, and such is my guest gift to thee. Accordingly I took them, and leaving her door ajar, returned to my lodging. Next morning up came the judge, with his face like the jock's eye, and asked, In the name of Allah, where is my debtor, and where is my property? Then he wept, and cried out, and said to the wali, Where is that ill-omened fellow, who aboundeth in robbery and villainy? Thereupon the chief turned to me and said, Why dost thou not answer the Kasi? And I replied, O Emir, the two heads are not equal, and I have no helper, but, an the right be on my side, 'twill appear. At this the judge grew hotter of temper, and cried out, Woe to thee, O ill-omened wight! How wilt thou make manifest that the right is on thy side? I replied, O our lord the Kasi, I deposited with thee, and in thy charge a woman, whom we found at thy door, and on her raiment and ornaments of price. Now she is gone, even as yesterday is gone. And after this thou turnest upon us, and suest me for 6,000 gold pieces? By Allah, this is none other than a mighty great wrong, and assuredly some foe of hers in thy household hath transgressed against her. With this the judge's wrath redoubled, and he swore by the most solemn of oaths that I should go with him and search his house. I replied, By Allah, I will not go, unless the wali go with us, and thee be present, he and the officers. Thou wilt not dare to work thy wicked will upon me. So the Kasi rose and swore an oath, saying, By the truth of him who created mankind, we will not go but with the Emir. Accordingly, we repaired to the judge's house, accompanied by the chief, and going up, searched it through, but found naught. Whereat fear fell upon me, and the wali turned to me and said, Fie upon thee, O ill-omened fellow! Thou hast put us to shame before the men. All this, and I wept, and went round about right and left, with tears running down my face, till we were about to go forth, and drew near the door of the house. I looked at the place which the woman had mentioned, and asked, What is yonder place I see? Then said I to the men, Pull up this jar with me. They did my bidding, and I saw somewhat appearing under the jar, and said, Rummage, and look at what is under it. So they searched, and behold, they came upon a woman's mantilla, and walking boots stained with blood, which when I espied, I fell down in fainting fit. Now when the wali saw this, he said, By Allah, the captain is excused. Then my comrades came round about me, and sprinkled water on my face till I recovered. When I arose, I accosted the Kasi, who was covered with confusion, said to him, Thou seest that suspicion is fallen on thee, and indeed this affair is no light matter, because this woman's family will assuredly not sit down quietly under her loss. Therewith the Kazi's heart quaked and fluttered, for that he knew the suspicion had reverted upon him. Wherefore his color yellowed, and his limbs smote together, and he paid of his own money, after the measure of that he had lost, so we would quench that fire for him. Then we departed from him in peace, whilst I said within myself, Indeed the woman falsed me not. After that I tarried till 3 days had passed, when I went to the hammam and changed my clothes, betook myself to her home, but found the door shut and covered with dust. So I asked the neighbors of her, and they answered, This house hath been empty of habitants these many days. But 3 days agone, there came a woman with an ass, and at supper time last night she took her gear and went away. Hereat I turned back, bewildered in my wit, and for many days after I inquired of the dwellers in that street concerning her, but could happen on no tidings of her. And indeed I wondered at the eloquence of her tongue and the readiness of her talk. And this is the most admirable of all I've seen, and whatso hath betided me.
The Scar on the Throat, from the 1001 Nights. There was once a king named Sulayman Shah, who was goodly of policy and counsel, and he had a brother who died and left a daughter. So Sulayman Shah reared her with the best of rearing, and the girl became a model of reason and perfection, nor was there in her time a more beautiful than she. Now the king had 2 sons, one of whom he had appointed in his mind to wed her, while the other purposed to take her. The eldest son's name was Bahluwan, and that of the younger Malik Shah, and the girl was called Shah Khatun. Now one day King Sulayman Shah went into his brother's daughter, and, kissing her head, said to her, Thou art my daughter, and dearer to me than a child, for the love of thy late father, who hath found mercy. Wherefore I purpose espousing thee to one of my sons, and appointing him my heir apparent, so he may be king after me. Look then which thou wilt have of my sons, for that thou hast been reared with them, and knowest them. The maiden arose, and kissing his hand, said to him, O my lord, I am thine handmaid, and thou art the ruler over me. So whatever liketh thee, do that same, inasmuch as thy wish is higher and honourabler and holier than mine. And if thou wouldst have me serve thee as a handmaid for the rest of my life, 'twere fairer to me than any mate. The king commended her speech, and conferred on her a robe of honour, and gave her magnificent gifts, after which, his choice having fallen upon his younger son, Malik Shah, he wedded her with him, and made him his heir apparent, and bade the folk swear fealty to him. When this reached his brother Bahluwan, and he was aware that his younger brother had by favour been preferred over him, his breast was straitened, and the affair was sore to him, and envy entered into him and hate. But he hid this in his heart, while fire raged therein because of the damsel and the dominion. Meanwhile Shah Khatun went in bridal splendour to the king's son, and conceived by him, and bare a son, as he were the illuming moon. When Bahluwan saw this betide his brother, envy and jealousy overcame him, so he went in one night to his father's palace, and coming to his brother's chamber, saw the nurse sleeping at the door with the cradle before her, and therein his brother's child asleep. Bahluwan stood by him, and fell to looking upon his face, whose radiance was as that of the moon, and Satan insinuated himself into his heart, so that he bethought himself and said, Why be not this babe mine? Verily, I am worthier of him than my brother, yea, and of the damsel and the dominion. Then the idea got the mastery of him, and anger drove him, so that he took out a knife, and setting it to the child's gullet, cut his throat and would have severed his windpipe. So he left him for dead, and entering his brother's chamber, saw him asleep, with the princess by his side, and thought to slay her. but said to himself, "I will leave the girl wife for myself." Then he went up to his brother, and cutting his throat, parted head from body, after which he left him and went away. But now the world was straitened upon him, and his life was a light matter to him, and he sought the lodging of his sire Sulayman Shah, that he might slay him also, but could not get admission to him. So he went forth from the palace, and hid himself in the city till the morrow, when he repaired to one of his father's fortalices, and therein fortified himself. On this wise it was with him, but as regards the nurse, she presently awoke that she might give the child suck, and seeing the cradle running with blood, cried out, whereupon the sleeper started up, and the king was aroused, and making for the place, found the child with his throat cut, and the bed running over with blood, and his father dead with a slit wizened in his sleeping chamber. They examined the child, and found life in him, and his windpipe whole, and they sewed up the place of the wound. Then the king sought his son Bahluwan, but found him not, and saw that he had fled. So he knew that it was he who had done this deed, and this was grievous to the king and to the people of his realm, and to the lady Shah Khatun. Thereupon the king laid out his son Malik Shah, and buried him, and made him a mighty funeral, and they mourned with passing sore mourning, after which he applied himself to rearing the infant. As for Bahluwan, when he fled and fortified himself, his power waxed amain, and there remained for him but to make war upon his father, who had cast his fondness upon the child, and used to rear him on his knees and supplicate Almighty Allah that he might live, so he might commit the command to him. When he came to 5 years of age, the king mounted him on horseback, and the people of the city rejoiced in him, and prayed for him length of life, that he might take vengeance for his father and heal his grandsire's heart. Meanwhile Bahluwan the rebel addressed himself to pay court to Caesar, king of the Roum, and crave aid of him in debelling his father, and he inclined unto him and gave him a numerous army. His sire, the king, hearing of this, sent to Caesar, saying, O glorious king of might illustrious, succor not an evildoer. This is my son, and he hath done so, and cut his brother's throat, and that of his brother's son in the cradle. But he told not the king of the Roum that the child had recovered and was alive. When Caesar heard the truth of the matter, it was grievous to him as grievous could be, and he sent back to Sulayman Shah, saying, An it be thy wish, O king, I will cut off his head and send it to thee. But he made answer, saying, I care naught for him. Soon and surely the reward of his deed and his crimes shall overtake him, if not today, then tomorrow. And from that date he continued to exchange letters and presents with Caesar. Now the king of the Roum heard tell of the widowed princess, and of the beauty and loveliness wherewith she was endowed, wherefore his heart clave to her, and he sent to seek her in wedlock of Sulayman Shah, who could not refuse him. So he arose, and going into Shah Khatun, said to her, O my daughter, the king of the Roum hath sent to me to seek thee in marriage. What sayest thou? She wept, and replied, O king, how canst thou find it in thy heart to address me thus? As for me, abideth their husband for me after the son of my uncle? Rejoined the king, O my daughter, 'tis indeed as thou sayest, but here let us look to the issues of affairs. I must now take compt of death, for that I am a man shot in years, and fear not, save for thee and thy little son. And indeed I have written to the king of the Roum and others of the kings, and said, his uncle slew him, and said not that he hath recovered and is living, but concealed his affair. Now the king of the Roum hath sent to demand thee in marriage, and this is no thing to be refused, and fain would we have our back strengthened with him. And she was silent and spake not. So King Sulayman Shah made answer to Caesar with hearing and obeying. Then he arose and dispatched her to him, and Caesar went in to her, and found her passing the description wherewith they had described her, wherefore he loved her every day more and more, and preferred her over all his women, and his affection for Sulayman Shah was increased. But Shah Khatun's heart still clave to her child, and she could say naught. As for Sulayman Shah's son, the rebel Bahluwan, when he saw that Shah Khatun had married the king of the Roum, this was grievous to him, and he despaired of her. Meanwhile, his father Sulayman Shah watched over the child and cherished him and named him Malik Shah after the name of his sire. When he reached the age of 10, he made the folk do homage to him and appointed him his heir apparent. And after some days, the old king's time for paying the debt of nature drew near, and he died. Now a party of the troops had banded themselves together for Bahluwan, so they sent to him, and bringing him privily, went into the little Malik Shah and seized him and seated his uncle Bahluwan on the throne of kingship. Then they proclaimed him king and did homage to him all, saying, Verily, we desire thee and deliver to thee the throne of kingship, but we wish of thee that thou slay not thy brother's son, because we are still bounden by the oaths we swore to his sire and his grandsire, and the covenants we made with them. So Bahluwan granted this to them, and imprisoned the boy in an underground dungeon and straitened him. Presently the grievous news reached his mother, and this was to her a fresh grief, but she could not speak, and committed her affair to Allah Almighty, for that she durst not name this to King Caesar her spouse, lest she should make her uncle King Sulayman Shah a liar. But as regards Bahluwan the rebel, he abode king in his father's place, and his affairs prospered, while young Malik Shah lay in the souterrain 4 full-told years, till his favour faded and his charms changed. When he, extolled and exalted be he, willed to relieve him and to bring him forth of the prison, Bahluwan sat one day with his chief officers and the lords of his land, and discoursed with them of the story of his sire, King Sulayman Shah, and what was in his heart. Now there were present certain wazirs, men of worth, and they said to him, O king, verily Allah hath been bountiful to thee, and hath brought thee to thy wish, so that thou art become king in thy father's palace, and has won whatso thou wishedest. But as for this youth, there is no guilt in him, because he, from the day of his coming into the world, hath seen neither ease nor pleasure, and indeed his favour is faded and his charms changed. What is his crime that he should merit such pains and penalties? Indeed, others than he were to blame, and hereto Allah hath given thee the victory over them, and there is no fault in this poor lad. Quoth Bahluwan, Verily, 'tis as ye say, but I fear his machinations, and am not safe from his mischief. Haply the most part of the folk will incline unto him. They replied, O king, what is this boy, and what power hath he? And thou fear him? Send him to one of the frontiers. And Bahluwan said, Ye speak sooth. So we will send him as captain of war to reduce one of the outlying stations. Now over against the place in question was a host of enemies, hard of heart, and in this he designed the slaughter of the youth. So he bade bring him forth of the underground dungeon, and caused him draw near to him, and saw his case. Then he robed him, whereat the folk rejoiced, and bound for him the banners, and, giving him a mighty many, dispatched him to the quarter aforesaid, whither all who went or were slain or were taken. Accordingly Malik Shah fared thither with his force, and when it was one of the days, behold, the enemy attacked them in the night, whereupon some of his men fled, and the rest the enemy captured, and they seized Malik Shah also, and cast him into a pit with a company of his men. His fellows mourned over his beauty and loveliness, and there he abode a whole 12 months in the evilest plight. Now at the beginning of every year it was the enemy's wont to bring forth their prisoners and cast them down from the top of the citadel to the bottom. So at the customed time they brought them forth and cast them down, and Malik Shah with them. However, he fell upon the other men, and the ground touched him not, for his term was God guarded. But those who were cast down there were slain upon the spot, and their bodies ceased not to lie there till the wild beasts ate them, and the winds scattered their bones. Malik Shah abode strown in his place and a swoon all that day and that night, and when he revived and found himself safe and sound, he thanked Allah the Most High for his safety, and rising, left the place. He gave not over walking, unknowing whither he went, and dieting upon the leaves of the trees, and by day he hid himself where he might, and fared on at hazard all the night, and thus he did for some days, till he came to a populous part, and seeing folk there, accosted them. He acquainted them with his case, giving them to know that he had been prisoned in the fortress, and that they had thrown him down, but Almighty Allah had saved him and brought him off alive. The people had ruth on him, and gave him to eat and drink, and he abode with them several days. Then he questioned them of the way that led to the kingdom of his uncle Bahluwan, but told them not that he was his father's brother. So they showed him the road, and he ceased not to go barefoot, till he drew near his uncle's capital, naked and hungry, and indeed his limbs were lean, and his colour changed. He sat down at the city gate, when behold, up came a company of King Bahluwan's chief officers, who were out a-hunting, and wished to water their horses. They lighted down to rest, and the youth accosted them, saying, I would ask you of somewhat, that ye may acquaint me therewith. Quoth they, Ask what thou wilt. And quoth he, Is King Bahluwan well? They derided him, and replied, What a fool art thou, O youth! Thou art a stranger and a beggar, and whence art thou that thou shouldst question concerning the king? Cried he, In very sooth, he is my uncle. Whereat they marvelled, and said, 'Twas one catch question, and now 'tis become two. Then said they to him, O youth, it is as if thou wert jinn-mad. Whence comest thou to claim kinship with the king? Indeed, we know not that he hath any kith and kin save a nephew, a brother's son, who was prisoned with him, and he dispatched him to wage war upon the infidels, so that they slew him. Said Malik Shah, I am he, and they slew me not, but there befell me this and that. They knew him forthwith, and rising to him, kissed his hands and rejoiced in him, and said to him, O our lord, thou art indeed a king, and the son of a king, and we desire thee naught but good, and we pray for thy continuance. Look how Allah hath rescued thee from this wicked uncle, who sent thee to a place whence none ever came off safe and sound, purposing not in this but thy destruction, and indeed thou fellest upon death, from which Allah delivered thee. How then wilt thou return and cast thyself again into thy foeman's hand? By Allah, save thyself, and return not to him this second time. Haply thou shalt abide upon the face of the earth till it please Almighty Allah to receive thee, but an thou fall again into his hand, he will not suffer thee to live a single hour. The prince thanked them, and said to them, Allah reward you with all weal, for indeed ye give me loyal counsel. But whither would ye have me wend? Quoth they, To the land of the Room, the abiding place of thy mother. But, quoth he, my grandfather Sulayman Shah, when the king of the Room wrote to him, demanding my mother in marriage, hid my affair and secreted my secret, and she hath done the same, and I cannot make her a liar. Rejoined they, Thou sayest sooth, but we desire thine advantage, and even wert thou to take service with the folk, 'twere a means of thy continuance. Then each and every of them brought out to him money, and gave him a modicum, and clad him and fed him, and fared on with him the length of a parasang, till they brought him far from the city, and letting him know that he was safe, departed from him, while he journeyed till he came forth of his uncle's reign, and entered the dominion of the Roum. Then he made a village, and taking up his abode therein, applied himself to serving one there in earing and seeding and the like. As for his mother, Shah Khatun, great was her longing for her child, and she thought of him ever, and news of him was cut off from her. So her life was troubled, and she forswore sleep and could not make mention of him before King Caesar, her spouse. Now she had a eunuch who had come with her from the court of her uncle King Sulayman Shah, and he was intelligent, quick-witted, right-readed. So she took him apart one day and said to him, shedding tears the while, "Thou hast been my eunuch from my childhood to this day. Canst thou not therefore get me tidings of my son, seeing that I cannot speak of his matter?" He replied, "O my lady, this is an affair which thou hast concealed from the commencement, and were thy son here, 'twould not be possible for thee to entertain him, lest thine honour be smirched with the king, for they would never credit thee, since the news hath been bruited abroad that thy son was slain by his uncle." Quoth she, "The case is even as thou sayest, and thou speakest sooth. But, provided I know that my son is alive, let him be in these parts pasturing sheep, and let me not sight him, nor he sight me." He asked, "How shall we manage in this matter?" And she answered, "Here be my treasures and my wealth. Take all thou wilt, and bring me my son, or else tidings of him." Then they devised a device between them, which was that they should feign some business in their own country, to wit that she had wealth there buried from the time of her husband, Malik Shah, and that none knew of it but this eunuch who was with her, so it behoved him to go fetch it. Accordingly, she acquainted the king her husband with that, and sought his permit for the eunuch to fare. And the king granted him leave of absence for the journey, and charged him devise a device, lest he come to grief. The eunuch, therefore, disguised himself in merchant's habit, and repairing to Balawan's city, began to make espial concerning the youth's case. Whereupon they told him that he had been prisoned in a souterrain, and that his uncle had released him, and dispatched him to such a place where they had slain him. When the eunuch heard this, the mishap was grievous to him, and his breast was straitened, and he knew not what to do. It chanced one day of the days that a certain of the horsemen, who had fallen in with the young Malik Shah by the water, and clad him and given him spending money, saw the eunuch in the city habited as a merchant, and recognizing him, questioned him of his case and of the cause of his coming. Quoth he, "I came to sell merchandise." And quoth the horseman, "I will tell thee somewhat, and thou canst keep it secret." Answered the eunuch, "That I can. What is it?" And the other said, "We met the king's son, Malik Shah, I and sundry of the Arabs who were with me, and saw him by such a water, and gave him spending money, and sent him toward the land of the Rum, near his mother, for that we feared for him lest his uncle Balawan slay him." Then he told him all that had passed between them, whereat the eunuch's countenance changed, and he said to the cavalier, "Thou art safe." The knight replied, "Thou also art safe, though thou come in quest of him." And the eunuch rejoined, saying, "Truly, that is my errand. There is no rest for his mother, lying down or rising up, and she hath sent me to seek news of him." Quoth the cavalier, "Go in safety, for he is in a quarter of the land of the Rum, even as I said to thee." The eunuch thanked him, and blessed him, and mounting returned upon his road, following the trail, while the knight rode with him to a certain highway, when he said to him, "This is where we left him." Then he took leave of him, and returned to his own city, while the eunuch fared on along the road, inquiring in every village he entered of the youth, by the description which the rider had given him. And he ceased not thus to do till he came to the village wherein was young Malik Shah. So he entered, and dismounting made inquiry after the prince, but none gave him news of him, whereat he abode perplexed concerning his affair, and made ready to depart. Accordingly he mounted his horse, but as he passed through the village he saw a cow bound with a rope, and a youth asleep by her side, bending the halter in hand. So he looked at him and passed on, and heeded him not in his heart. But presently he halted, and said to himself, And the youth who I am questing have become the like of this sleeping youth whom I passed but now. How shall I know him? Alas, the length of my travail and travel! How shall I go about in search of a somebody I know not, one whom, if I saw him face to face, I should not know? So saying, he turned back, musing anent that sleeping youth, and coming to him, he still sleeping, dismounted from his mare and sat down by his side. He fixed his eyes upon his face, and considered him a while, and said in himself, For aught I wot, this youth may be Malik Shah. Then he began hemming and saying, Hark ye, O youth! Whereupon the sleeper awoke and sat up, and the eunuch asked him, Who be thy father in this village, and where be thy dwelling? The youth sighed and replied, I am a stranger. And quoth the eunuch, From what land art thou, and who is thy sire? Quoth the other, I am from such a land. And the eunuch ceased not to question him, and he to answer his queries, till he was certified of him and knew him. So he arose and embraced him and kissed him and wept over his case. He also told him that he was wandering about in search of him, and informed him that he was come privily from the king, his mother's husband, and that his mother would be satisfied to weet that he was alive and well, though she saw him not. Then he re-entered the village, and buying the prince a horse, mounted him, and they ceased not going till they came to the frontier of their own country, where there fell robbers upon them by the way, and took all that was with them, and pinioned them, after which they threw them into a pit hard by the road, and went their ways and left them to die there. And indeed they had cast many folk into that pit, and they had perished. The eunuch fell a-weeping in the pit, and the youth said to him, What is this weeping, and what shall it profit here? Quoth the eunuch, I weep not for fear of death, but of ruth for thee and the cursedness of thy case, and because of thy mother's heart, and for that which thou hast suffered of horrors, and that thy death should be this ignoble death, after the endurance of all manner of dire distresses. But the youth said, That which hath betided me was writ to me, and that which is written none hath power to efface. And if my life term be advanced, none may defer it. Then the twain passed that night, and the following day, and the next night, and the next day, in the hollow, till they were weak with hunger, and came nigh upon death, and could but groan feebly. Now it fortuned by the decree of Almighty Allah and his destiny, that Caesar, king of the Greeks, the spouse of Malik Shah's mother, Shah Khatun, went forth a-hunting that morning. He flushed a head of game, he and his company, and chased it, till they came up with it by that pit, whereupon one of them lighted down from his horse to slaughter it, hard by the mouth of the hollow. He heard a sound of low moaning from the sole of the pit, whereat he arose, and mounting his horse, waited till the troops were assembled. Then he acquainted the king with this, and he bade one of his servants descend into the hollow. So the man climbed down and brought out the youth and the eunuch in fainting condition. They cut their pinion bonds and poured wine down their throats till they came to themselves, when the king looked at the eunuch, and recognizing him, said, Hark ye, such an one. The eunuch replied, Yes, O my lord the king, and prostrated himself to him, whereat the king wondered with exceeding wonder, and asked him, How camest thou to this place, and what hath befallen thee? The eunuch answered, I went and took out the treasure and brought it thus far, but the evil eye was behind me, and I unknowing. So the thieves took us alone here, and seized the money, and cast us into this pit, that we might die the slow death of hunger, even as they had done with others. But Allah the Most High sent thee in pity to us. The king marvelled, he and his, and praised the Lord for that he had come thither, after which he turned to the eunuch and said to him, what is this youth thou hast with thee?" He replied, "O king, this is the son of a nurse who belonged to us, and we left him when he was a little one. I saw him today, and his mother said to me, 'Take him with thee.' So this morning I brought him that he might be a servant to the king, for that he is an adroit youth and a clever." Then the king fared on, he and his company, and with them the eunuch and the youth, who questioned his companion of Bahluwan, and his dealing with his subjects. And he replied, saying, "As thy head liveth, O my lord the king, the folk are in sore annoy with him, and not one of them wisheth a sight of him, be they high or low." When the king returned to his palace, he went into his wife Shah Khatun, and said to her, "I give thee the glad tidings of thy eunuch's return." And he told her what had betided, and of the youth whom he had brought with him. When she heard this, her wits fled, and she would have screamed, but her reason restrained her. And the king said to her, "What is this? Art thou overcome with grief for the loss of the moneys, or for that which hath befallen the eunuch?" Said she, "Nay, as thy head liveth, O king, but women are weaklings." Then came the eunuch, and going in to her, told her all that had happened to him, and also acquainted her with her son's case, and with that which he had suffered of distresses, and how his uncle had exposed him to slaughter, and he had been taken prisoner, and they had cast him into the pit, and hurled him from the highmost of the citadel, and how Allah had delivered him from these perils, all of them. And whilst he recounted to her all this, she wept. Then she asked him, "When the king saw him, and questioned thee of him, what was it thou saidst him?" And he answered, "I said to him, This is the son of a nurse who belonged to us. We left him a little one, and he grew up, so I brought him, that he might be servant to the king." Cried she, "Thou didst well." And she charged him to serve the prince with faithful service. As for the king, he redoubled in kindness to the eunuch, and appointed the youth a liberal allowance, and the abode, going into and coming out of the king's house, and standing in his service. And every day he waxed better with him. As for Shah Khatun, she used to station herself at watch for him, at the windows and in the balconies, and gaze upon him, and she frying on coals of fire on his account, yet could she not speak. In such condition she abode a long while, and indeed yearning for him was killing her. So she stood and watched for him one day at the door of her chamber, and straining him to her bosom, buzzed him on the breast, and kissed him on either cheek. At this moment, behold, out came the major domo of the king's household, and seeing her embracing the youth, started in amazement. Then he asked to whom that chamber belonged, and was answered, "To Shah Khatun, wife of the king." Whereupon he turned back, quaking as one smitten by a leven bolt. The king saw him in a tremor, and said to him, "Out on thee! What is the matter?" Said he, "O king, what matter can be more grievous than that which I see?" Asked the king, "What seest thou?" And the officer answered, "I see that the youth, who came with the eunuch, was not brought with him save on account of Shah Khatun. For I passed but now by her chamber door, and she was standing watching, and when the youth came up, she rose to him, and clipped him, and kissed him on his cheek." When the king heard this, he bowed his head amazed, perplexed, and sinking into a seat, clutched at his beard, and shook it till he came nigh upon plucking it out. Then he arose forthright, and laid hands on the youth, and clapped him in jail. He also took the eunuch, and cast them both into a souterrain under his palace. After this he went into Shah Khatun, and said to her, "Brava, by Allah, O daughter of nobles! O thou whom kings sought to wed for the purity of thy repute and the fairness of the fame of thee, how seemly is thy semblance! Now may Allah curse her whose inward contrarieth her outward. after the likeness of thy base favour, whose exterior is handsome, and its interior fulsome, face fair, and deeds foul. Verily, I mean to make of thee and of yonder ne'er-do-well an example among the lieges, for that thou sentest not thine eunuch, but of intent on his account, so that he took him and brought him into my palace, and thou hast trampled my head with him, and this is none other than exceeding boldness. But thou shalt see what I will do with you all. So saying, he spat in her face and went out from her, while Shah Khatun said nothing, well knowing that, and she spoke at that time, he would not credit her speech. Then she humbled herself in supplication to Allah Almighty, and said, O God the Great, thou knowest the things by secrecy ensealed, and their outwards revealed and their inwards concealed. If an advanced life-term be appointed to me, let it not be deferred, and if a deferred one, let it not be advanced. On this wise she passed some days, while the king fell into bewilderment, and forswore meat and drink and sleep, and abode knowing not what lie should do, and saying to himself, And I slay the eunuch and the youth, my soul will not be solaced, for they are not to blame, seeing that she sent to fetch him, and my heart careth not to kill them all three. But I will not be hasty in doing them die, for that I fear repentance. Then he left them, so that he might look into the affair. Now he had a nurse, a foster mother, on whose knees he had been reared, and she was a woman of understanding, and suspected him, yet dared not question him. So she went in to Shah Khatun, and finding her in yet sadder plight than he, asked her what was to do, but she refused to answer. However, the nurse gave not over coaxing and questioning her, till she swore her to concealment. Accordingly, the old woman made oath that she would keep secret all that she should say to her, whereupon the queen to her related her history, first and last, and told her that the youth was her son. With this the old woman prostrated herself before her, and said to her, This is a right easy matter. But the queen replied, By Allah, O my mother, I prefer my destruction and that of my son to defending myself by a plea which they will not believe, for they will say, She pleaded this only that she may fend off shame from herself, and naught will profit me save long suffering. The old woman was moved by her speech and her wisdom, and said to her, Indeed, O my daughter, 'tis as thou sayest, and I hope in Allah that he will show forth the truth. Have patience, and I will presently go into the king, and hear his words, and machinate somewhat in this matter, Inshallah. Thereupon the ancient dame arose, and going into the king, found him with his head between his knees in sore pain of sorrow. She sat down by him a while, and bespoke him with soft words, and said to him, Indeed, O my son, thou consumest my vitals, for that these many days thou hast not mounted horse, and thou grievest, and I know not what aileth thee. He replied, O my mother, all is due to yonder accursed, of whom I deemed so well, and who hath done this and that. Then he related to her the whole story from beginning to end, and she cried to him, This thy chagrin is on account of a no better than she should be? Quoth he, I was but considering by what death I should slay them, so the folk may take warning and repent. And quoth she, O my son, wear precipitance, for it gendereth repentance, and the slaying of them shall not escape thee. When thou art assured of this affair, do whatso thou willest. He rejoined, O my mother, there needeth no assurance anent him for whom she dispatched her eunuch, and he fetched him. But she retorted, There is a thing wherewith we will make her confess, and all that is in her heart shall be discovered to thee. Asked the king, What is that? And she answered, I will bring thee the heart of a hoopie, which, when she sleepeth, do thou lay upon her bosom, and question her of everything thou wouldst know, and she will discover the same unto thee, and show forth the truth to thee. The king rejoiced in this, and said to his nurse, Hasten thou, and let none know of thee. So she arose, and going into the queen, said to her, I have done thy business, and 'tis as follows. This night the king will come in to thee, and do thou seem asleep. And if he ask thee of aught, do thou answer him, as if in thy sleep. The queen thanked her, and the old dame went away, and fetching the bird's heart, gave it to the king. Hardly was the night come, when he went in to his wife, and found her lying back, a-slumbering. So he sat down by her side, and laying the hoopie's heart on her breast, waited a while, so he might be assured that she slept. Then said he to her, Shah Khatun, Shah Khatun, is this my reward from thee? Quoth she, What offence have I committed? And quoth he, What offence can be greater than this? Thou sentest after yonder youth, and broughtest him hither, on account of thy wicked desire. Said she, This youth is my son, and a piece of my heart, and of my longing and affection for him I could not contain myself, but sprang upon him and kissed him. When the king heard this, he was dazed and amazed, and said to her, Hast thou a proof that this youth is thy son? Indeed, I have a letter from thine uncle, King Sulayman Shah, informing me that his uncle Bahluwan cut his throat. Said she, Yes, he did indeed cut his throat, but severed not the windpipe. So my uncle sewed up the wound, and reared him, but that his lifetime was not come. When the king heard this, he said, This proof sufficeth me, and rising forthright in the night, bade bring the youth and the eunuch. Then he examined his stepson's throat with a candle, and saw the scar where it had been cut from ear to ear, and indeed the place had healed up, and it was like a thread stretched out. Thereupon the king fell down prostrate before Allah, who had delivered the prince from all these perils, and from the distresses he had suffered, and rejoiced with joy exceeding, because he had delayed, and had not made haste to slay him, in which case mighty sore repentance had betided him.
The Sharpers and the Moneylender. From the Arabic. 4 sharpers once plotted against a shroff, a man of much wealth, and agreed upon a sleight for securing some of his coins. So one of them took an ass, and laying on it a bag wherein were dirhams, lighted down at the shop of the shroff, and sought of him small change. The man of monies brought out to him the silver bits, and bartered with them, whilst the sharper was easy with him in the matter of the exchange, so he might gar him long for more gain. As they were thus, up came the other 3 sharpers, and surrounded the donkey, and one of them said, "'Tis he," and another said, "Wait till I look at him." Then he took to considering the ass, and stroking him from crest to tail, whilst the third went up to him, and handed him, and felt him from head to rump, saying, "Yes, 'tis in him." Said another, "No, 'tis not in him." And they left not doing the like of this for some time. Then they accosted the donkey's owner, and chaffered with him, and he said, "I will not sell him but for 10,000 dirhams." They offered him 1,000 dirhams, but he refused, and swore that he would not vend the ass but for that which he had said. They ceased not adding to their offer till the price reached 5,000 dirhams, whilst their mate still said, "I'll not vend him save for 10,000 silver pieces." The shroff advised him to sell, but he would not do this, and said to him, "Ho, Shah, thou wouldest not case of this donkey. Stick to silver and gold, and what pertaineth thereto of exchange and small change, because indeed the virtue of this ass is a mystery to thee. For every craft its crafty men, and for every means of livelihood its peculiar people." When the affair was prolonged upon the 3 sharpers, they went away and sat down aside. Then they came up privily to the money changer, and said to him, "An thou can buy him for us, do so, and we will give thee 20 dirhams." Quoth he, "Go away and sit down at a distance from him." So they did as he bade, And the Shroff went up to the owner of the ass, and ceased not luring him with lucre, and said, Leave these wights, and sell me the donkey, and I will reckon him a present from thee, till he sold him the animal for 5,500 dirhams. Accordingly, the money changer weighed out to him that sum of his own monies, and the owner of the ass took the price, and delivered the beast to him, saying, Whatso shall betide, though he abide a deposit upon thy neck, sell him not to yonder cheats for less than 10,000 dirhams, for that they would fain buy him because of a hidden hoard they know, whereto naught can guide him save this donkey. So close thy hand on him, and cross me not, or thou shalt repent. With these words he left him and went away. Whereupon up came the 3 other sharpers, the comrades of him of the ass, and said to the Shroff, God requite thee for us with good, in that thou hast bought him. How can we reward thee? Quoth he, I will not sell him but for 10,000 dirhams. When they heard that, they returned to the ass, and fell again to examining him like buyers, and handling him. Then they said to the money changer, Indeed, we were deceived in him. This is not the ass we sought, and he is not worth to us more than 10 nufs. Then they left him and offered to go away, whereat the Shroff was sore chagrined, and cried out at their speech, saying, O folk, ye asked me to buy him for you, and now I have bought him. Ye say, we were deceived in him, and he is not worth to us more than 10 nufs. They replied, We thought that in him was whatso we wanted. But behold, in him is the contrary of that which we wish. And indeed he hath a blemish, for that he is short of back. Then they made long noses at him, and went away from him and dispersed. The money changer deemed that they did but play him off, that they might get the donkey at their own price. But when they walked away from him, and he had long awaited their return, he cried out, saying, Well away, and ruin, and sorry case I am in, and shrieked aloud, and rent his raiment. So the market people assembled to him, and questioned him of his case. Whereupon he acquainted them with his condition, and told them what the knaves had said, and how they had cozened him, and how they had cajoled him into buying an ass worth 50 dirhams for 5,500. His friends blamed him, and a gathering of the folk laughed at him, and admired his folly, and overfaith in believing the talk of the sharpers without suspicion, and meddling with that which he understood not, and thrusting himself into that whereof he had no sure knowledge. The Melancholist and the Sharper. From the Arabic. There was once a Richard hight Ajlan, the hasty, who wasted his wealth, and concern and chagrin got the mastery of him, so that he became a melancholist and lost his wit. There remained with him of his moneys about 20 dinars, and he used to beg alms of the folk, and whatso they gave him in charity he would gather together and add to the gold pieces that were left him. Now there was in that town a sharper, who made his living by roguery, and he knew that the melancholist had somewhat of money. So he fell to spying upon him, and ceased not watching him till he saw him put into an earthen pot that which he had with him of silvers, and enter a deserted ruin, where he sat down, and straightway began to dig a hole, wherein he laid the pot, and covering it up, smoothed the ground as it had been. Then he went away, and the sharper came, and taking what was in the pot, restored it to its former place. Presently Ajlan returned, with somewhat to add to his hoard, but found it not. So he bethought him of who had followed him, and remembered that he had found that sharper assiduous in sitting with him and questioning him. So he went in search of him, assured that he had taken the pot, and gave not over looking for him till he saw him sitting, whereupon he went to him, and the sharper saw him. Then the melancholist stood within earshot, and muttered to himself, and said, In the pot are 60 ducats, and I have with me the other 20 in such a place, and today I will unite the whole in the pot. When the sharper heard him say this to himself, muttering and mumbling, repeating and blundering in his speech, he repented him of having taken the sequins, and said, He will presently return to the pot and find it empty. Wherefore that which I am on the lookout will escape me, and meseemeth 'twere best I replace the dinars, so he may see them and leave all which is with him in the pot, and I can take the whole. Now he feared to return to the pot at once, lest the melancholist should follow him to the place and find nothing, and on this wise his arrangements be marred. So he said to him, O Ajlan, I would have thee come to my lodging and eat bread with me. Therefore the melancholist went with him to his quarters, and he seated him there, and going to the market sold somewhat of his clothes, and pawned somewhat from his house, and bought the best of food. Then he betook himself to the ruin, and replacing the money in the pot, buried it again, after which he returned to his lodging and gave the melancholist to eat and drink, and they went out together. The sharper walked away and hid himself, lest his guests should see him, while Ajlan repaired to his hiding place and took the pot. Presently the sharper returned to the ruin, rejoicing in that which he deemed he should get, and dug in the place, but found naught, and knew that the melancholist had outwitted him. So he began buffeting his face for regret, and fell to following the other, whitherso he went, to the intent that he might win what was with him, but he failed in this, because the melancholist knew what was in his mind, and was assured that he spied upon him. So he kept watch over himself. Now, had the sharper considered the consequences of haste, and that which is begotten of loss therefrom, he had not done on such wise.
The Cunning Crone, from the 1001 Nights. There came one day an old woman to the stuff bazaar, with a casket of mighty fine workmanship, containing trinkets, and she was accompanied by a young baggage. The crone sat down at the shop of a draper, and giving him to know that the girl was of the household of the prefect of police of the city, took of him, on credit, stuffs to the value of 1,000 dinars, and deposited with him the casket as security. She opened the casket, and showed him that which was therein, and he found it full of trinkets of price. So he trusted her with the goods, and she farewelled him, and carrying the stuffs to the girl who was with her, went her way. Then the old woman was absent from him a great while, and when her absence was prolonged, the draper despaired of her. So he went up to the prefect's house, and asked anent the woman of his household who had taken his stuffs on credit, but could obtain no tidings of her, nor happen on any trace of her. Then he brought out the casket of jewelry and showed it to experts, who told him that the trinkets were gilt, and that their worth was but 100 dirhams. When he heard this, he was sore concerned thereat, and presenting himself before the deputy of the Sultan made his complaint to him, whereupon the official knew that a slight had been served upon him, and that the sons of Adam had cozened him, and conquered him, and cribbed his stuffs. Now the magistrate in question was a man of experience and judgment, well versed in affairs. So he said to the draper, "Remove somewhat from thy shop, including the casket, and tomorrow morning break the lock, and cry out, and come to me, and complain that they have plundered all thy shop. Also mind thou call upon Allah for aid, and wail aloud, and acquaint the people, so that a world of folk may flock to thee, and cite the breach of the lock, and that which is missing from thy shop. And on this wise display it to every one who presenteth himself, that the news may be noised abroad, and tell them that thy chief concern is for a casket of great value, deposited with thee by a great man of the town, and that thou standest in fear of him. But be thou not afraid, and still say ever and anon in thy saying, My casket was the casket of such an one, and I fear him, and dare not bespeak him. But you, O company, and all ye who are present, I call you to witness of this for me. And if there be with thee more than this saying, say it, and the old woman will assuredly come to thee." The draper answered with, "To hear is to obey," and going forth from the deputy's presence, betook himself to his shop, and brought out thence the casket and merchandise, making a great display, which he removed to his house. At break of day he arose, and, going to his shop, broke the lock, and shouted and shrieked, and called on Allah for aid, till each and every of the folk assembled about him, and all who were in the city were present, whereupon he cried out to them, saying even as the prefect had bidden him, and this was bruited abroad. Then he made for the prefecture, and presenting himself before the chief of police, cried out and complained, and made a show of distraction. After 3 days the old woman came to him, and bringing him the 1,000 dinars, the price of the stuffs, demanded the casket. When he saw her, he seized her, and carried her to the prefect of the city, and when she came before the Qazi, he said to her, "Woe to thee, O Sataness! Did not thy first deed suffice thee, but thou must come a second time?" She replied, I am of those who seek their plunder in the cities, and we foregather every month, and yesterday we foregathered. He asked her, Canst thou cause me to catch them? And she answered, Yes, but, an thou wait till tomorrow, they will have dispersed, so I will deliver them to thee tonight. The Emir said to her, Go. And said she, Send with me one who shall go with me to them, and obey me in whatso I shall say to him, and all that I bid him he shall not gainsay, and therein conform to my way. Accordingly he gave her a company of men, and she took them, and bringing them to a certain door, said to them, Stand ye here at this door, and whoso cometh out to you, seize him, and I will come out to you last of all. Hearing and obeying, answered they, and stood at the door, whilst the crone went in. They waited a whole hour, even as the Sultan's deputy had bidden them, but none came out to them, and their standing waxed longsome. And when they were weary of waiting, they went up to the door, and smote upon it a heavy blow, and a violent, so that they came nigh to break the wooden bolt. Then one of them entered, and was absent a long while, but found not. So he returned to his comrades, and said to them, This is the door of a dark passage, leading to such a thoroughfare, and indeed she laughed at you, and left you, and went away. When they heard his words, they returned to the Emir, and acquainted him with the case, whereby he knew that the old woman was a cunning craft-mistress, and that she had mocked at them, and cozened them, and put a cheat on them, to save herself. Witness, then, the wiles of this woman, and that which she contrived of guile, for all her lack of foresight in presenting herself a second time to the draper, and not suspecting that his conduct was but a slight, yet, when she found herself hard upon calamity, she straightway devised a device for her deliverance.